And now I'd like to bring up Rebecca Bernard, who is a PhD student in fiction, to give us a proper introduction. So here's Rebecca.
Hello. Robert Boswell begins his essay, The Alternate Universe, by describing a scene from Marilynne Robinson's first novel, Housekeeping, where the narrator, Ruth, a young girl, drifts in a rowboat with her aunt Sylvie in the middle of the night below a train bridge. Years before, the train carrying the girl's grandfather derailed over this bridge, sinking into the lake below. Now, another train comes rattling along. The sound grew louder and louder, and there was a trembling through the whole frame. The whole long bridge was as quick and tense as vertebrae. Shock banged and pounded in every joint. I saw a light pass over my head like a meteor, and then I smelled hot, foul, black oil and heard the gnash of wheels along the rails. It was a very long train. Boswell describes this moment as magic, as a shimmer, something that moves us from the concrete world of the story into a higher plane of meaning. In my mind, it's something that tells us about what it means to be a human being, what's visceral about our experience in our bodies, and what's epiphanic, the two at once together. Housekeeping was my first introduction to Robinson's work back during my MFA, and my experience reading it was nothing less than a haunting. Days, months, years later, I could still see the house filled with leaves, see Sylvie and Ruth making their way along the narrow railroad bridge at the novel's end. But what's more is the feeling the novel implanted in my being. It's as if the rotting house were a fragment of my own chest rotting, the loneliness and candor of the characters' lives, something I might secret and cherish in the small box of my heart. Even now, I have not let these feelings go. I do not think I'm able. In an interview with the New York Times Magazine in 2014, in reference to a question about Lila, her most recent novel, Robinson states, "Being and human beings are invested with a degree of value that we can't honor appropriately, an overabundance that is magical." In all of her works, I believe we see both this magic and this empathy of overabundance. Her characters are loved, and so we love them, feel their bones, their beauty, and their ugliness. As I continue to read Robinson's work, first Gilead and most recently Lila, I find myself again and again experiencing this sense of wonder, of what blooms from the plainness of humanity, and how as a reader of Robinson's work, we are trusted to make this meaning our own. Reading Lila, we are the neglected child working to make sense of her surroundings, the lack and the grace. In Gilead, it's the minister Jonathan Ames whose letters carry us through the narrative. We make sense of life as he does. In an interview with The Nation, Robinson states, "I don't have much sense of myself as a writer apart from what I write. It's the voice that's in my mind that governs what I write." And it's the humility and honesty in this statement that we feel in reading her work. These are stories that belong to the characters, and so belong to us, her fortunate readers. In the fall of 2018, I had the privilege of teaching housekeeping to my undergraduate composition students. And to be honest, at first, I was nervous to see how they would take to the work, the complexity of its religiosity, the chasms of Ruth's interiority. And yet, to my surprise, they were almost immediately engrossed in the world of the novel. What does it mean to keep a house? What does it mean to exist in the United States, to live a so-called normal life? What does it mean to be a woman, to inhabit that body in that space? These were some of the best discussions we had all semester. And at the end of the unit, several students told me that although they don't regularly read novels, if there were more novels like Housekeeping that I could recommend, they would read them. What is this if not a testament to the magic of Robinson's prose? Among her many accolades, Marilynne Robinson is a recipient of the 2012 National Humanities Medal awarded by President Barack Obama. She is the author of Gilead, winner of the 2005 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and the National Book Critics Circle Award, Home, winner of the Orange Prize and the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and Lila, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award. Her first novel, Housekeeping, won the Hemingway Foundation Pen Award. Robinson's nonfiction books include The Givenness of Things, When I Was a Child, I Read Books, Absence of Mind, The Death of Adam, and Mother Country, which was nominated for a National Book Award. She taught for many years at the prestigious University of Iowa Writers' Workshop, retiring in the spring of 2016. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Marilynne Robinson.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to be here. I'm going to read today from chapter 8 of Housekeeping. I did not put chapters in this book. My editor did that. Then of course, that this part of the book was published by Harper's as, first rights thing. And so I have a sort of sentimental attachment to it. Oddly enough, this book is 40 years old. Published 40 years ago. Hard for me to believe. That's probably because I took a 24-year vacation from writing fiction. So, sort of the excision of time has made it all seem to pass rather quickly. I can't take you anywhere. In any case, I realize that I spent a lot of my childhood watching lake water. The most striking part of my childhood environment was a very large, very cold glacial lake called Lake Ponderay, which is so deep that in the Second World War they used it to test submarine parts. And as I said yesterday, many family stories in that particular town, that region, circle around these lakes, which tend to be rather ferocious and excessive in their behavior. So, I will read chapter 8. Sylvie, not all of it, it's long. Sylvie made up a lunch that night after supper, and we set the alarm clock for 5 and went to sleep early with our clothes on. Nevertheless, Sylvie had to tease me awake. She pinched my cheek and pulled my ear. Then she set my feet on the floor and pulled me up by the hands. I sat down on the bed again and fell over onto the pillow, and she laughed. "Get up," she said. "In a minute. Now, breakfast is ready." I crouched on the covers, hoarding warmth and sleep, while they passed off me like a mist. "Wake up, wake up, wake up," Sylvie said. She picked up my hand, patted it, toyed with my fingers. When I was no longer warm enough or quite asleep, I sat up. "Good girl," Sylvie said. The room was dark. When Sylvie put the light on, it still seemed sullen and full of sleep. There were cries of birds, sharp and rudimentary, that stung like sparks or hail. And even in the house, I could smell how raw the wind was. That sort of wind brought out a musk in the fir trees and spread the cold breath of the lake everywhere. There was nothing out there, no smell of wood, smoke, or oatmeal, no hint of human comfort. And when I went outside, I would be miserable. It was almost November and long before dawn, and I did not want to leave my bed. "Come, Ruthie," Sylvie said, and pulled me by both hands toward the door. "My shoes," I said. She stopped, still holding my hand, and I stepped into them, but she did not wait for me to tie the laces. Come on, down the stairs now." "Do we have to hurry?" Yes, we have to hurry." She opened the trap door and went down the stairs ahead of me, and still pulling me by one hand. In the kitchen, she stopped to scoop an egg out of the frying pan and set it on a piece of bread. "There's your breakfast," she said. "You can eat it while we walk." "I have to tie my shoes," I said to her back as she walked out to the porch. "Wait." But the screen door slammed behind her. I tied my shoes and found my coat and pulled it on and ran out the door after her. The grass was blue with frost. The road was so cold it rang as I stepped on it, and the houses and trees and sky were one flat black. A bird sang with a sound like someone scraping a pot and was silent. I had given up all sensation to the discomforts of cold and haste and hunger, and crouched far inside myself, still sleeping. Finally, Sylvie was in front of me, and I put my hands in my pockets and tilted my head and strode as she did, and it was as if I were her shadow, and moved after her only because she moved, and not because I willed this pace, this pocketing of the hands, this tilt of the head. Following her required neither will nor effort. I did it in my sleep. I walked after Sylvie down the shore, all at peace and at ease, and I thought, we are the same. She could as well be my mother. I crouched and slept in her very shape like an unborn child. Wait here, Sylvie said, when we came to the shore. She walked down to a place where trees grew near the water. After a few minutes, she came back. The boat is not where I left it, she said. Well, we'll have to look for it. I'll find it. Sometimes it takes a while, but I always find it. She climbed up onto a rock that stood out from the hillside, almost to the water, and looked up and down the shore. I'll bet it's over there. She climbed down from the rock and began walking south. See those trees? I found it once before in a place just like that, all covered with branches. Someone was trying to hide it, I suggested. Can you imagine? I always put it right back where I find it. I don't care if someone else uses it, so long as they don't damage it. We walked down to where a stand of birch and aspen trees sheltered a little inlet. This would be a perfect place for it, Sylvie said, but it was not there. Don't be discouraged, she said. We're so early, no one could have got to it first. Wait. She walked up into the woods. Behind a fallen log, behind a clump of fat, low-growing pines, was a heap of pine boughs with poplar branches and brown needles and leaves. Here and there, an edge or a corner of a tarpaulin showed. Look at that, Sylvie said. Someone went to a lot of trouble. She kicked away the branches until on one side the tarpaulin and the shape of the rowboat were exposed. Then she lifted the side of the boat until it fell over upright on the heap of branches. She pulled at the tarpaulin that had been spread under the boat until she found the oars. She stuck them under the seat. The boat made a thick, warm sound as we pushed it through the pine needles. It scraped dully across some big rocks, then dragged through the sand. We pushed it into the water. Get in, Sylvie said. Hurry. I climbed in and sat down on a narrow, splintery plank facing the shore. There's a man yelling at us, I said. Oh, I know, Sylvie said. Sylvie pushed the boat out in 2 long strides, and then with a hand on each gunwale, half leaped and half pulled herself into it. The boat wallowed alarmingly. I have to sit in that seat, she said. She stood up and turned around and stooped to hold the gunwales, and I crawled under her body and out between her legs. A stone splashed the water inches from my face, and another rattled into the bottom of the boat. Sylvie swung an oar over my head, settled it into the log, crouched, and pulled us strongly away from the shore. A stone flew past my arm. I looked back and saw a burly man in knee boots and black pants and a red plaid jacket. I could see that he was wearing one of those shapeless felt hats that fishermen there decorate with preposterous small gleams and plumes and violent hooks. His voice was full of rage. Just ignore him, Sylvie said. She pulled again and we were beyond reach. The man had followed us into the water until he was up to his boot tops in it. Lady, he bawled. Ignore him, Sylvie said. He always acts like that. If he thinks someone's watching him, he just carries on more. I turned around and watched Sylvie. Her handling of the boat was strong and easy. When we were about 100 yards from the shore, she turned the boat toward the north. The man, now back on the beach, was still yelling and dancing his wrath and pitching stones after us. It's pitiful, Sylvie said. He's going to have a heart attack someday. It must be his boat, I suggested. Sylvie shrugged. Or he might just be some sort of lunatic, she said. I'm certainly not going to go back and find out. She was unperturbed by our bare escape and by her drenched loafers and the soggy skirts of her coat. I found myself wondering if this was why she came home with fish in her pockets. "Aren't you cold, Sylvie?" "The sun's coming up," she said. The sky above Fingerbone was a floral yellow. A few spindled clouds smoldered and glowed a most unfired pink. And then the sun flung a long shaft over the mountain and another, like a long-legged insect bracing itself out of its chrysalis. And then it showed above the black crest, bristly and red and improbable. In an hour it would be the ordinary sun spreading modest and impersonal light on an ordinary world, and that thought relieved me. Sylvie continued to pull strongly and slowly. "You wouldn't believe how many people live out here on the islands and up in the hills," Sylvie said. "I think there are 100 or more. Sometimes if you'll see a little smoke in the woods, there might be a cabin there with 10 children in it. They just hunt and fish, mostly. Have you ever seen any of them?" "I think I have," Sylvie said. "Sometimes I think I see smoke, and I go walking to it. And now and then I'm sure there are children around me. I can practically hear them." "Oh, that's one reason I keep crackers in my pockets." "I see." Sylvie rode on through the gilded water, smiling to herself. "I'll tell you something. You'll probably think I'm crazy. I tried to catch one once." She laughed. "Not, trap it, but lure it out with marshmallows so I could see it. What would I do with another child?" "So you did see someone?" "I just stuck marshmallows on the twigs of one of the apple trees almost every day for a couple of weeks. Then I sat sort of out of sight. There's still a doorstep there with lilacs growing on both sides of it. The house itself fell into the cellar hole years ago, of course. I just sat there and waited, but it never came. I was a little bit relieved," she said. "A child like that might claw or bite, but I did want to look at it." "This isn't the place we're going to now?" Sylvie smiled and nodded. "Now you're in on my secret. Maybe you'll have better luck. And at least we don't have to hurry. It was so hard to get home in time for you and Lucille." Sylvie pulled and then pulled, and we slid heavily through the slosh and jostle of the water. Sylvie looked at the sky and said no more. I peered over the side now and then into the murky transparencies of the upper waters, which were clouded and crude as agate. I saw gulls' feathers and the black shapes of fish. The fragmented image of jonquil sky spilled from top to top of the rounding waves as the shine spills on silk, and gulls sailed up into the very height of the sky, still stark white when they could just be seen. To the east, the mountains were eclipsed. To the west, they stood in balmy light. Dawn and its excesses always reminded me of heaven, a place where I have always known I would not be comfortable. They reminded me of my grandfather's paintings, which I have always taken to be his vision of heaven. And it was he who brought us here to this bitter, moon-pulled lake, trailing us after him unborn, like the infants he had painted on the dresser drawers, whose garments swam in some ethereal current, perhaps the rim of the vortex that would drag them down out of that enameled sky, stripped and screaming. Sylvie's oars set off vortices. She swamped some leaves and spun a feather on its curl. The current that made us slide a little toward the center of the lake was the draw of the river, and no vortex, though my grandfather's last migration had settled him on the lake floor. It seemed that Sylvie's boat slipped down the west side of every wave. We would make a circle and never reach ashore at all if there were a vortex, I thought, and we would be drawn down into the darker world where other sounds would pour into our ears until we seemed to find songs in them, and the sight of water would invade our eyes, and the taste of water would invade our bowels and unstring our bones, and we would know the seasons and customs of the place as if there were no others. I imagine my grandfather reclined how many years in his Pullman berth, regarding the morning through a small blue window. He might see us and think he was dreaming again of flushed but weightless spirits in a painted sky, buoyant in an impalpable element. And when our shadow had passed, he might see the daylit moon, a jawless, socketed shard, and take it for his image in the glass. Of course, he was miles away, miles south, at the foot of the bridge. At last she pulled us toward a broad point that lay out into the lake. I could see that the mountain standing behind and against the one from which the point extended had a broken side. Stone showed pink as a scar on the dog's ear. You can see where it is from here, Sylvie said. They built right beside those cliffs. She brought us up against the shore and we climbed out of the boat and dragged it up on the beach. I followed Sylvie inland along the side of the point. The mountains that walled the valley were too close the one upon the other. The rampages of glaciers in their eons of slow violence had left the landscape in a great disorder. Out from the cleft or valley the mountain made spilled a lap of spongy earth overgrown with brush. We walked up it along the deep, pebbly bed left by the runoff and the rain, and there we came upon the place Sylvie had told me about, stunted orchard, lilacs, and stone doorstep and fallen house, all white with the brine of frost. Sylvie smiled at me. Pretty, isn't it? It's pretty, but I don't know how anyone could have wanted to live here. It's really pretty in the sunlight. You'll see in a little while. Well, let's not wait here, though. It's too cold. Sylvie glanced at me a little surprised. But you'll want to watch for the children. Yes, all right. Well, I think you better just stay in one place and be very quiet. Yes, but it's too cold here. Sylvie shrugged. It's still early. We walked back down to the shore and found some rocks against which we could sit out of the wind facing the sun. Sylvie crossed her ankles and folded her arms. She appeared to fall asleep. After a while I said, Sylvie. She smiled. Shh. Where's our lunch? Still in the boat. You're probably right. It would be good if they saw you eating. I found a bag of marshmallows among the odds and ends that Sylvie had bundled into a checkered tablecloth and brought along for lunch. A black banana, a lump of salami with a knife through it, a single yellow chicken wing like an elegant small gesture of defeat, the bottom fifth of a bag of potato chips. I ripped the cellophane and took out marshmallows to fill my pockets. Then I sat down by Sylvie and made a small fire of driftwood and skewered one through its soft belly with a stick and held it in the flame until it caught fire. I let it burn until it was as black as a lump of coal, then pulled off the weightless husk with my fingers and ate it, and held the creamy part that still clung to the stick in the flames until it caught fire, and so the morning passed. Sylvie stood up and stretched and nodded at the sun, which was a small, white, wintry sun, and stood askant the zenith, although it was surely noon. We can go up there now, she said. I followed her up into the valley again and found it much changed. It was as if the light had coaxed a flowering from the frost, which before seemed barren and parched as salt. The grass shone with petal colors, and water drops spilled from all the trees as innumerably as petals. I told you it was nice, Sylvie said. Imagine a Carthage sown with salt and all the sowers gone, and the seeds laying however long in the earth till there rose finally in vegetable profusion leaves and trees of rime and brine. What flowering would there be in such a garden? Light would force each salt calyx to open in prisms, and to fruit heavily with bright globes of water. Peaches and grapes are little more than that, and where the world was salt, there would be greater need of slaking. For need can blossom into all the compensations it requires. To crave and to have are as like as a thing and its shadow. For when does a berry break upon the tongue as sweetly as when one longs to taste it? And when is the taste refracted into so many hues and savors of ripeness and earth? And when do our senses know anything so utterly as when we lack it? And here again is a foreshadowing. The world will be made whole. For to wish for a hand on one's hair is all but to feel it. So whatever we may lose, very craving gives it back to us again. Though we dream and hardly know it, longing like an angel fosters us, smooths our hair, and brings us wild strawberries. Sylvie was gone. She had left without a word or a sound. I thought she must be teasing, perhaps watching me from the woods. I pretended not to know I was alone. I could see why Sylvie thought children might come here. Any child who saw once how the gleaming water spilled to the tips of branches and rounded and dropped and popped the softening shadows of frost at the foot of each tree would come to see it again. If there had been snow, I would have made a statue, a woman to stand along the path among the trees. The children would have come close to look at her. Lot's wife was salt and barren because she was full of loss and mourning and looked back. But here rare flowers would gleam in her hair and on her breast and in her hands, and there would be children all around her to love and marvel at her for her beauty and to laugh at her extravagant adornments as if they had set the flowers in her hair and thrown down all the flowers at her feet. And they would forgive her eagerly and lavishly for turning away, though she never asked to be forgiven. Though her hands were ice and did not touch them, she would be more than mother to them. She's so calm, so still, and they such wild and orphan things. I walked out of the valley and down the little apron of earth at its entrance. The shore was empty and, after its manner, silent. Sylvie must be up at the point, I thought. I imagined her hiding the boat more securely. That would be a reasonable precaution for her to take, convinced as she was that these woods were peopled. I sat on a log and whistled and tossed stones at the toe of my shoe. I knew why Sylvie felt there were children in the woods. I felt so too, though I did not think so. I sat on the log, holding my shoe, because I knew that if I turned, however quickly, to look behind me, the consciousness behind me would not still be there, and would only come closer when I turned away again. Even if it spoke just at my ear, as it seemed often at the point of doing, when I turned there would be nothing there. In that way it was persistent and teasing and ungentle, the way half-wild, lonely children are. This was something Lucille and I together would ignore, and I had been avoiding the shore all that fall because when I was by myself, and obviously lonely too, the teasing would be much more difficult to disregard. Having a sister or a friend is like sitting at night in a lighted house. Those outside can watch you if they want, but you need not see them. You simply say, "Here are the perimeters of my attention. If you prowl around under the windows till the crickets go silent, we will pull the shades. If you wish us to suffer your envious curiosity, you must permit us not to notice it." Anyone with one solid human bond is that smug, and it is the smugness as much as the comfort and safety that lonely people covet and admire. I had been, so to speak, turned out of house now long enough to have observed this in myself. Now there was neither threshold nor sill between me and these cold, solitary children who almost breathed against my cheek and almost touched my hair. I decided to go back up and wait for Sylvie by the cellar hole where she could not help but find me. Daylight had moved up the eastern wall of the valley and shone warmly on the ragged and precipitous stands of black oak trees that grew at those altitudes. Down below there was only shadow and a wind that swept along the lake just at the level of my knees. The lilacs rattled. The stone step was too cold to be sat upon. It seemed at first that there was no comfort for me there at all, so I jammed my hands in my pockets, pressed my elbows at my sides, and cursed Sylvie in my heart. And that was a relief because it gave me something to think about beside the woods. With effort, I began to think of other things. If I went down into the cellar hole, out of the wind, I could build a fire and be warm. This could not be done easily since the cellar had received the remains of the old house. She thinks about the children. She imagines being in that collapsed house. I imagine myself in their place. It was not hard to do this, for the appearance of relative solidity in my grandmother's house was deceptive. It was an impression created by the piano and the scrolled couch and the bookcases full of almanacs and Kipling and Defoe. For all the appearance these things gave of substance and solidity, they might better be considered a dangerous weight on a frail structure. I could easily imagine the piano crashing to the cellar floor with the thrum of all its strings. And then, too, our house should not have had a second story, for if it fell while we were sleeping, we would plummet disastrously through the dark, knowing no more perhaps than that our dreams were suddenly terrible and suddenly gone. A small house was better. It broke gracefully like some ripe pod or shell, and despite the stories I made up to myself, I knew there were no children trapped in this meager ruin. They were light and spare and thoroughly used to the cold, and it was almost a joke to them to be cast out into the woods, even if their eyes were gone and their feet were broken. It is better to have nothing, for at last even our bones will fall. It is better to have nothing. I sat down on the grass, which was stiff with the cold, and I put my hands over my face, and I let my skin tighten and let the chills run in ripples like breezy water between my shoulder blades and up my neck. I let the numbing grass touch my ankles. I thought, Sylvie is nowhere, and sometime it will be dark. I thought, let them come unhouse me of this flesh, and pry this house apart. It was no shelter now. It only kept me here alone, and I would rather be with them, if only to see them, even if they turned away from me. If I could see my mother, it would not have to be her eyes, her hair. I would not need to touch her sleeve. There was no more stoop to her high shoulders. The lake had taken that, I knew. It was so very long since the dark had swum her hair, and there was nothing more to dream of. But often she almost slipped through any door I saw from the side of my eye, and it was she, and not changed and not perished. She was a music I no longer heard, that rang in my mind, itself and nothing else, lost to all sense, but not perished, not perished. Sylvie put her hand on my back. She had knelt on the grass beside me, and I had not noticed. She looked into my face and said nothing at all. She opened her coat and closed it around me, bundling me awkwardly against her so that my cheekbone pillowed on her breastbone. She swayed as to some slow song she did not sing, and I stayed very still against her and hid the awkwardness and discomfort so that she would continue to hold me and sway. For some reason, the inside of Sylvie's coat smelled of camphor. The smell was pleasant enough, like cedar pitch or incense, curative and elegiac. Her dress was of a staunch, dry-textured cotton, and over it she wore an oolong sweater. The dress was surely brown or green, the sweater pink or yellow, but I could not see. I crouched low enough so that Sylvie's coat prevented even a creep of light through my eyelids. I said, I didn't see them. I couldn't see them. I know, she said. That was the song she rocked me to. I know, I know, I know. She crooned, another time, another time. Ask me. Yes?
Thank you so much for being here. It's great to hear you read, and I'm very drawn to your child characters. I wonder when you are teaching children how you are careful to shelter them from sentimentality or melodrama. And I know you're aiming for poignancy and depth, and it just seems like when you do children, there's a danger of slipping into overmuch in the emotion category. So could you talk about how you treat children, keep them fresh and vital and not bogged down in some of that juicy stuff?
Yeah. I suppose, in a certain sense, I proceed from memory, and I proceed from children that I remember knowing when I was a child. Adults are sentimental about children. Children are very unsentimental, and I think so long as you're scrupulously careful to keep yourself within an actual child's consciousness, those things kind of fall away. Yes?
Last night in your talk, you said that you don't draft any broken lives. And I'm curious if you could elaborate on that, especially as it pertains to your editors.
My editors have a kind of a lovely hands-off policy. I have not had to argue with them about the fact that I really don't like people interfering with my language, because basically I know why, because I don't edit, because I write everything the way I hope it will be in the first instance, or at least the way it seems to want to be. I have a reason for what I do, and I don't. It's not open for revision. I'd much rather not publish something than have it inappropriately edited. I'm very rigid on that point. Yes?
I guess to follow up, so in your teaching with your grade writing students, how do you talk about drafting revision?
They have to go down the hall to the next professor to hear about that. I think that part of the genius of the Writers' Workshop is that we really do not settle on one way of teaching or even talk to each other about what we're doing. Everybody proceeds by his or her best lights, and there are enough people on the faculty to give them a variety of opinions. I know very good writers who draft and who do all that stuff, revise, spend years doing that. It would drive me completely crazy, and because it's not a natural method for me. I think that when you think about what writing is, when you read about reading, how brain organizes itself to read, and this is something that has come very late in human evolution, and yet we are always surprised. It's an aberration from our point of view when somebody can't learn to read. One of the things that's interesting about the beginning of the modern period is that there were biblical translators working in every language, taking books into places where no book had ever been seen, and the people say, "Oh, yes, makes perfect sense to me." You know what I mean? It's miraculous that there is such a human gift for reading when you consider that it's such a very brief period in our career on the planet when there wouldn't have been anything to reward us for any similar behavior. Now, if reading is a strange use of the brain, something that in effect is reinvented by everybody who learns it, it's not as if it were identifiable as one function, then think how strange writing is. For the number of people who, write creatively is minuscule over against the number of people who read what they write, So I assume that this is a strange recruiting of mental capacities that were really not designed for this use in the first place, you know? And so there's no surprise in the fact that people go about it differently, that it's a highly individual, business. But at the same time, the way we have taught, you've drawn your own experience. And I could not begin to tell anybody how to draft. I couldn't. I don't like the idea of having prepared the trajectory of something before I write it, you know? So, in other words, I just did rely on the fact that there were other people in the building who could talk about those things.
Yeah,
Yes.
Following up on that question also, coming at this as a musician rather than a writer, I'm compelled to ask, would you say your process then is analogous to improvisation rather than composition?
I think it's probably somewhere in between. I listen to Bach in order to reinforce long sentences in myself, which some people would not think I needed to do. But you know, to hear a phrase complete itself and to hear it vary itself and all that sort of thing, it's very analogous to what you're doing when you're writing. That's very true, you know. But I don't know. I mean, I'm very often surprised by where my prose goes. I will think there's a word I need here, and I will spend 3 minutes trying to, recover the word I want, and then I find that it implies something else and has taken the language in a direction I hadn't anticipated. It's almost always a good thing when that happens. You have to constrain, because you want to be intelligible. But it's also true that very much as music would do, I assume, when a certain phrase or a certain word occurs to you, there are colorations and nuances and so on that open out in your mind that you would not have pre-existing the moment in which they seem appropriate, seem suggestive. Yes?
So the first few chapters of the book I had a slight hard time following, mainly because of how over-descriptive the writing was. I was wondering if that was your writing style, or is that like a nod at Ruthie's mentality that she kind of acquired from Sylvie, like the disorganized, over-descriptive, distracted type of voice?
Well, no, I don't think of myself as having a style. I know that I'm lying about that, but I don't think of myself as having a style. I think of each novel I write as having a voice. And this is a novel that's very much about consciousness. She's trying to understand her experience of life that is extremely disrupted and tentative in many ways and so on. And so you could say she has a kind of an excited consciousness because she's thinking about if she can pay enough attention and pay precise enough attention, that she will begin to find a kind of intelligibility and meaning in things that do not yield themselves to that kind of understanding readily. Yes? I cannot hear you. There's this nice microphone just standing here,
I was just curious, since you're writing so the script, if it took you a long time to write it, and you found that
Well, I think that, I did do some kind of work on the novel before I actually began the novel, before I realized that's what I was doing. But basically, wheels up to wheels down, as it were, it was only about 14 months. There were things that helped, like the fact that I was teaching in a French university that went on strike. And at the same time, Milan Kundera was writing The Incredible Lightness of Being. So it was a very, what should we say, fortunate strike that they went through. For me, a great question while I'm writing is always the phrase, what was it like? because that invites a metaphor or a simile, you know. When you're trying to tell something about something that he or she cannot see or draw up from experience, then what you do, which is always true, is you answer the question, what is it like, you know? And so in order to create the world that I had as my subject, I, of course, was, you know, the water looked like an agate, you know. The movement of the waves felt like the pull of a vortex, you know. So from that point of view, I think descriptive language was really kind of a large part of the point. Yes?
Having written in multiple genres of writing, what do you think that the novel is able to accomplish as opposed to the short story or to nonfiction?
Well, what the novel can accomplish, first of all, is it spares me failing at writing short stories. I can't do that. That's one of the things I think is very interesting about, you know, seeing student writers, because there are people who truly cannot write short stories, and there are people who truly cannot write novels. It's sort of like being a sprinter or a distance runner, you know. And I think one of the problems when people are in these classes is that just the form of the thing encourages short stories. But if you have this much of a trajectory of the narrative, it looks like a failed story, when in fact it's an unfinished novel, you know? And people have to be very sensitive to that possibility. I think that, I'm very glad that I write fiction and nonfiction both, because I have subjects that I think are suitable to one or suitable to the other. And because I can feel quite physically, I think you can say that, the difference between writing one and writing the other, and it's refreshing to make the change, you know. Yes.
Good afternoon, Professor. I was just curious as to, you say you do work before your novels and also speak about the trajectory of them. How would you say more often that you begin novels? Do you, or any writing in general, do you just jump into it, or would you say it's more research-based and doing that before work?
Well, you know, I do research all the time. It's just a sort of impulse of mine. And, I've researched subjects that I will never touch fictionally, I'm sure, you know, or probably non-fictionally either. But it's sort of like, if you do good research, you can feel changes in your brain. You know what I mean? You can understand that you have a larger conceptual palette to work from and all the rest, so that it is a stimulus to writing that I do, in fact, do. Housekeeping was just drawing on my childhood, basically. Things in it like that, imagine a Carthage stone with salt, you know, that's a kind of it's what my Latin teacher would have called an epic simile. Bless her heart. In any case, so that was just like introspection. I was in a dark room in France with the university closed and the shutters drawn, and having one of those sensory deprivation experiences, you know, and remembering Idaho. I would think, which I had left 17 years previously, and I would think, I am the only person in the universe who is in the French countryside remembering Idaho. I've never heard this theory contradicted. But Gilead was the consequence of research that I did without intending that a novel should come. I moved to Iowa, where I really had not anticipated being a sort of mountain-identified person myself. And I would say to people, what is the history of this place? And they'd say it has no history, which is just not humanly possible. So I started researching it. It has a fabulous, incredibly interesting history, you know. So I spent some time, you know, years, a couple of years, reading everything that I could find that came out of that period of time. relevant to that subject, and also learning to see the aesthetics of the Iowa landscape, which was not immediately apparent to me, which I'm very happy to have succeeded in doing. But then it happened, after I had done this, for my own sake, really, that this voice began to speak in my mind, and that was John Ames. And I was alone in a hotel in Provincetown during Christmas vacation when the town was empty, and I was waiting for my sons to come join me in an empty hotel. And his voice began. That's how my novels begin. Ruth is a voice, and everything implied in her voice is the marrow of the novel. It's, insofar as, like teaching writing, which is such an elusive and difficult thing to do, but if you write seriously, you will find that you have resources that you would never have known were there. The precision of the memory of Idaho that I was able to draw, just being in a dark room, was astonishing to me. But every time you write with full concentration, you will be surprised at yourself. You will be surprised at how much you know, how big your vocabulary is, how finely tuned, your sense of perception is in its stored form in your mind. I think that, people, we're conditioned in this culture and in this period to undervalue ourselves very much in terms of the individuation of our very, very extensive cerebral capacities, I always tell my students, or any other captive audience, that the most complex object known to exist in the universe is a human brain. And everybody's got one, right? I mean, here is this room full of the most complex objects known to exist in the universe.